How are ya? It's good to see you again. We're doing worldviews again. This time, we're doing the Marxist worldview. Okay, now listen. If you don't know what a worldview is, I've already done a video to explain. It's about 15 minutes. Go have a look at that. Come back. It's going to give you some important information so you can make better sense of what I'm talking about, okay? So, just as a review, a worldview is the lens through which we see the world. It's a basic set of assumptions, and we don't usually think about them. They operate just under the surface, right? Let's talk about the Marxist worldview. The text that primary to Marx is his writings, which is the Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. That's what it's called, or the Capital if it's in English, right? Now, he wrote it in around 1850, 1860, somewhere around there. He wrote it with a friend of his called Engels, Friedrich Engels. These videos are not necessarily to give you a comprehensive worldview of Marxism or the worldviews that we go through. It's more or less to give you some foundational ideas so that you can think about them for yourself or talk about them with other people, right? So recognize that, number one, I might be wrong in my emphases, or sometimes I might even be wrong in how I've understood it. So I'm okay about that. I just need to let you guys know that this is a foundation from which you do your own study or have your own conversations, okay? This is not intended as a lecture to make sure that, you can have a diploma of understanding Marxism by the end. It goes by many names. So you might not call yourself a Marxist, or someone you know might not call themselves a Marxist. They might call themselves an anarchist or something like that. But basically, if your foundation is Marxist, you may call yourself something different, but I consider that to be a Marxist derivative. It's because the worldview is so fluid. It can be applied to lots of different areas. It reinvents itself and it applies its core principles in almost any area. Politics, environment, marketing, finance, music even. It really has crept into the culture that much, and it is a combative worldview, and it is very expansionist. All right, so let's get into it. Theology. Karl Marx's dad was a Christian, as I said before, but Marx abandoned any sort of belief really early, and he developed a kind of a hatred for all forms of religious worldviews when he was studying philosophy. So running through Marxist-Leninism, and I should probably explain that Lenin came in later, and even Antonio Gramsci came in later than that. And there've been theorists that have been trying to update or to reapply Marxism in a different form or in a different way to sort of match our culture. Running through Marxist-Leninism is a vivid hostility to all religious worldviews. Marx is quite famous for calling religion the opium of the people. And what he means by that is that religion makes the oppressed people more content with their oppression. So that's why he hates it. So this is a quote from Karl Marx. He says, it's as clear as the sun and evident as the day that there is no God, and still more, that there can be no God. Religious people in Marxist worldview, they contain these ideas in their head, and these ideas will come out in their language and influence people. So you have to either stop these people, these religious people, from speaking to anybody, so you put them in isolation in prison, or you have to eradicate them from the world. So in other words, you kill them. So in Marxist countries, you're going to see a persecution of all religious worldviews, and you're going to see them be put in isolation. They're not allowed to speak. They're not allowed to have a Bible. They're not allowed to have a religious text at all. Just total communication blackout. So this is Vladimir Lenin, a quote from him. Every religious idea, every idea of God, even flirting with the idea of God, is unutterable vileness. Vileness of the most dangerous kind. Contagion of the most abominable kind. So as you can see, Lenin is not mixing his words. Marxists are atheists. Okay, philosophy. How someone interprets science, okay? Marxism denies that God exists, okay? They also deny that anything supernatural exists. This is, you probably remember this from the secular humanist worldview. So Marxists believe that only things that are material, that can be tested, tasted, seen, interacted with, exist, okay? And that's called materialism. Marx puts a bit of a spin on it though, right? He has this thing called dialectical materialism. Now don't freak out, I'm going to explain dialectic in a little bit. Let's just stick with the material, okay? So all the concepts that Christians might attribute to God, or some religious worldview might attribute to God, Marx attributes them to material. So material is eternal, like it always existed. It doesn't start and it doesn't have an end. He thinks that how you think is a product of material. Like there's no like sort of spirit or soul of the human being to create like ideas and stuff like that. Like ideas are a product of material. Like everything is a product of material. Lenin called materialism primary, as in like the first mover. So it's infinite, and it explains thinking, feeling, and the entire experience of all of life. That's the idea that is contained in the word materialism in Marxism. Hopefully you can see how materialism in secular humanists is different. It's more scientific, I suppose. So let me explain Hegelian dialectic, which is a big deal for Marx. So Marx studied philosophy, and he saw in Hegel's dialectic theory something that he really wanted. So Marx adopted it and he adapted it. The dialectic is basically starting with what's known as a thesis, which is a positive. And then it attracts an antithesis, the opposite of it. It's a negative. And the thesis and the antithesis, they fight. They have conflict. They struggle with each other. And out of that struggle produces a synthesis, which is the best bits of the thesis and the antithesis. This synthesis becomes the new thesis, which attracts a new antithesis, which combine and conflict to make a new thesis, to make a new synthesis, which becomes the thesis. It's difficult. He's applied this dialectic conflict to lots of things. He's applied it to material. So material, something happens and then it has like evolution. So he sees it in evolution, like you've got something and then its antithesis comes and it struggles and then it performs it develops a new synthesis. And that process just keeps going and going and going. When listening to a Marxist, materialism, dialectics, and epistemology, how you know something, they're unable to be separated. And so to talk about materialism for a Marxist is intrinsically to talk about the concept of dialectics, Marx's dialectics, which is a little bit, he's adapted it from Hegel, and the definition of knowledge and true belief. So it's all believing and knowledge and the conflict of the universe, the constant conflict is all wound up in this idea of materialism. The way that Marxists see the world and interpret knowledge and science. They see it through these ideas. So let me just say a quote from Engels, Friedrich Engels. The materialist world outlook is simply the conception of nature as it is. This is what Lenin said. Matter is, this is the quote, he's quoting Engels, matter is, Engels wrote, primary nature. So this is Lenin's own thinking. Sensation, thought, consciousness are the highest products of matter organised in a certain way. This is the doctrine of materialism in general. Okay, Marx was looking for a scientific grounding for the worldview theories that he and Engels were developing. He saw, remember the dialectic? It's really important to him. He saw the dialectic expressed in Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest. Marx saw evolution as proof of this dialectic, right? This change was very slow over a long period of time. And Marx thought, no, this is too slow. I need a revolutionary idea, not an evolutionary idea. He took the idea and he postulated this idea of what's known as punctuated evolution. The naturalists were perplexed about the gaps in evolutionary evidence in the fossil records, right? So Marx suggested to solve that problem, well, that's just when evolution was occurring so quickly, it couldn't leave any evidence. So Marx's idea of evolution is that whatever started it, it started, right? So it's in motion. And then evolution rushes forward and then it slows down. And then it rushes forward again. These punctuated evolution, these punctuated moments of the speed up of evolution and then the settling. So that's the idea of punctuated evolution. I'll give you a quote from Karl Marx. I've read Darwin's work on natural selection. This is the book which contains the basis in natural science for our view. So when you read Marx, you've got to understand when he says materialism, evolution, when he uses these words, or in Marxist writings, it doesn't matter who, whether it's Marx or Engels or Lenin or just a regular Marxist at university, when they use these words, they mean more to the Marxist. They include these ideas of the dialectic and of this punctuated evolution. This is important for understanding Marxism. Proletariat morality is the idea, maybe I should explain what proletariat is. Okay, I really avoided using proletariat and bourgeois because for no matter how much I try, I can never remember how to spell either of them. And it's really frustrating. So let me explain the whole idea of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. The proletariat are the working class, people who work. It's kind of an arbitrary definition. They're oppressed by the bourgeoisie. So the bourgeoisie are the people that own the means of production. And they use that advantage to exploit and alienate the proletariat. And so when I say proletariat, I mean the Marxist idea of who they are. They believe they're part of the proletariat, the oppressed group. And when I say bourgeoisie, I mean the people who are oppressing them. If I say bourgeois, it's like an office of someone who's oppressing them. So the president is part of the bourgeoisie, the person. The office of president is a bourgeois office. So just to make it easier, I'm going to say the workers and the landowners. Okay, proletariat morality is the idea that the workers have been oppressed, and so basically anything they do that moves towards the revolution is absolutely okay. If the workers treat the landowners by killing them, if they steal, everything is okay if it's moving towards the revolution. For humanists, secular humanists, morality is about reducing conflict, right? For the Marxists, morality is actually about stirring it up. It's a big, big thing. So if you see a riot where, let's just say you see a protest, and some people start to provoke a riot, those people who are doing that are probably going to the protest with a Marxist idea of what they're doing. For a proletariat to not have a big screen TV, and for a bourgeoisie to have a big screen TV, that's inequality. So for the proletariat to steal a big screen TV is justice. They made it, or the working class were involved in making it, therefore they should own it. Basically ethics, anything, lying, cheating, stealing, killing, anything that the working class do to bring about a revolution in the cause of the revolution is absolutely okay. This is Friedrich Engels. Our cause is sacred. He whose hands will tremble, who will stop midway, whose knees shake before he destroys tens and hundreds of enemies, he will lead the revolution into danger. Whoever will spare a few lives of enemies will pay for it with hundreds and thousands of lives of the better sons of our fathers. All right, we're going to talk about psychology. Okay, well, it's a big one. I've got to get my brain ready. Brain ready, brain ready. Come on, we can do it. We can do it. I think we're halfway through. Okay. Marxists believe that nothing other than material exists, right? There's no spirit, there's no spiritual world, there's no soul, there's no nothing, right? So the only psychology that's available to them is behaviorism. I'll tell you about B.F. Skinner, okay? B.F. Skinner developed a theory called behaviorism by his experiments on animals. Jordan Peterson is a behavioral psychologist. Doesn't mean he's a Marxist, okay? It means he's a behavioral psychologist. So he would understand B.F. Skinner very well. This is just a sort of a lay summary of B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner postulated that humans are a stimulus receptor. And that means information from our environment is received by humans and then responded to by humans in a predetermined way. Behaviorism is an evolutionary system, meaning nature is in the role of the selector and humans are a product of their environment. And they can't be anything else. They can't be anything other than a product of their environment. Therefore, behaviorism demands determinism and rejects the free will of humans to self-determine their response to stimulus. Right? That's why you can study monkeys and determine things about humans. That's why you can study lobsters and find things about humans. In the Marxist worldview, Marx needed to keep the idea of free will, but he also needed to keep materialism, because Marx's ideas of inevitable communism, which is his idea of the evolution of ideas and the evolution of material and all that sort of stuff, will eventually inevitably lead to communism. It only comes about by a proletariat revolution worldwide. And that has to be voluntary. They need to choose to revolt. Definitely Marxists use B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement. You should look those things up and think about the COVID stuff. So Marxists definitely use behaviorism, but they need something extra. Pavlov, you've probably heard, he did some experiments on dogs. He rang a bell and was able to train dogs to salivate when they just heard the bell. It's a conditioned response, which is, behavioralism. So B.F. Skinner is different to Pavlovian behaviorism because of what's known as the signalling system. Okay, let me explain. Outside world, the environment, I'm talking about B.F. Skinner now. The outside world signals to our body and our body picks up the signal and then responds. Pavlov identified a second signalling system for humans. What he said was human language is the second signalling system. So not only do humans have environmental stimulus that they respond to, but they also respond to human language. That's what separates human beings from animals. They've developed language and speech. What this means, though, is for neo-Marxists, Marxists that are around today, they need to control your speech. Because you remember way back when we were doing theology in this video, where the church leader holds the ideas of their religion in their heart, and so they need to be separated from people so they don't speak it. This is political correctness, changing the way people speak. So that Marxists want to control language because they believe that language, how you speak, actually is a way of controlling other people. It's a way of the bourgeoisie to control unconverted members of the proletariat, and also each other. It's how they keep the control going, language. So Marxists need to control how you speak, what you speak. Let me give you a quote from B.F. Skinner. A scientific analysis of behaviour dispossesses autonomous man and turns the control he has been said to exert over to the environment. You get that? The individual, this is still B.F. Skinner, is henceforth to be controlled by the world around him and in large part by other men. So Nahum is a researcher of Marxism, and he said this: most decisively, it is influence on our thoughts, feelings and behaviour is society and societal relations. Human beings are distinguished from the animals by their social labour, their social communication, their social groupings, by their social acquisition and use of language, and by their involvement in the ideas, attitudes, morality, and behaviour of their society. So society controls us, our thoughts and our feelings and everything. And part of the way it does that is through language. So Marxist needs to control those things. That's part of what they're revolting against. Okay. Sociology. Marxist sociology. Marxist sociology is about abolishing the traditional family structure, the church or any religious structure, and the state. You might not realise that, but in Marxism, they don't actually want the state existing because they see it as a bourgeois tool to oppress people. So we've already talked about how Marxism believes that how you think and how you feel is directly determined by society. And so they seek to change society. I don't want to talk too much about this because I might do it in an explainer video. I'll need to. But Marxism gets reinterpreted in different areas, as I've said before. And so you might not realise, but the feminist movement may have started because of, they originally called it women's liberation. And so what happened was that Marxists poured into that movement and applied Marxist theory to the movement in order to present the patriarchy's oppression of women. And that's what Marxists do in society. They look and to find these dualities. So the church is oppressing the homosexual. So not all homosexuals are Marxists and not all women are Marxists. Don't misunderstand me. But what I'm saying, in the political movements that involve those two groups of people, Marxism has poured in and reinterpreted it, defined the language in terms of their ideas. And so they're constantly applying pressure and struggling to achieve that synthesis, which is the destruction of the church and the concept of homosexuality, or the destruction of the concept of man and woman. So Marxism applies itself in society quite liberally in the sense that it's everywhere. And as I said before, they'll apply their theory by finding two groups in conflict, or even inventing two groups inventing a conflict between two groups. And they will apply a lot of pressure to encourage conflict. That is what they go for, encouraging conflict, because that's how it moves. I mean, Antonio Gramsci was a guy who, an Italian bloke who wrote a lot in prison, and he came up of this concept of hegemony, which is a dominion perpetrated on people by the way society works. Marxists are trying to apply a new hegemony to destroy the old, because the old is part of the oppressive structure. So when you see feminism, when you see the homosexual lobbying groups or the LGBT lobbying groups, the union movement, I mean, even to a certain degree, the RSPCA and environment, Greenpeace, for an example, they are heavily influenced by Marxist thinking, use the Marxist playbook to achieve their goals. Now, imagine, if you would, a hammer, someone hammering a nail. You hammer the nail, it's a sharp movement, very powerful, and then you draw back and then you hit it again. And you do that until the nail is hammered. This is an analogy of Marxist social interaction, how they do their, how they operate. So Marxist groups will do a big push, and then they'll retreat and they'll let it go. They'll take off the pressure. And then they'll apply pressure really hard again. And then they'll pull back. And usually what happens, they get what they want when they retreat. So you might see big riots over Black Lives Matter or Antifa or something like that. So there's be big riots with lots of intense violence and stealing and looting and all that sort of stuff, and maybe even killing people. And then when they back off, they'll start to negotiate, and that's usually when they get what they want. So just remember the hammer. It's not the big incident that is the focus for the Marxist. It's the way that they take the pressure off. That's when they know they're going to get what they want. So keep that in mind. So this is what Marxists said. It is not the consciousness of men that determines their existence, but it's their social existence that determines their consciousness. Do you understand what Marx is saying there? It is the world around you that determines who you are and how you think. It's not intrinsically who you are and how you think that then determines your identity. It's the other way around. So this is something from Antonio Gramsci. He said, any country grounded in Judeo-Christian values can't be overthrown until these roots are cut. So they're trying to drive a wedge between society and religious ideas. Now, I'm going to read you a quote from a Marxist lexicon that was published to help educate people in high schools behind the Iron Curtain in Russia, in Moscow, right? This is the quote. The basic task of communist education and overcoming the survival of religiousness in our present condition is to prove to the pupil the complete contrast and complete irreconcilability between science, that is the real and correlated reflection of objectively existing world in the consciousness of people, and religion as a fanatic, distorted, and consequently harmful reflection of the world in the conscience of the people. Sometimes it's hard to read Marxist stuff because the language is a bit thick, but basically what that's saying is there are these two opposing forces, the thesis and the antithesis. The thesis is the Christian religious worldview, or the religious worldview. And what Marxist education seeks to do is to prove that the communist worldview, or the ideas or values or society that is envisaged by communism or Marxism, is the real way of seeing the world. And the religious worldview is a harmful, damaging, wrong reflection of the world. And notice that word consciousness coming in. Marxists, and Antonio Gramsci said this specifically, that they want education. They want to be able to educate the children with these ideas. They want to educate the undergrads and the postgrads and the PhD students. They want to teach this worldview any way they can to show that this worldview is right and produces good things, and any other worldview is wrong and produces bad things. That's their way of trying to change culture through the churches or the religious establishments. Marxists, Mao destroyed all the Buddhist temples as well. Don't think this is just about Christians. This is any religion. They want to control all of the social institutions. And that means destroying or abolishing the social institutions that already exist. We're going to talk about politics and leadership. So politics for a Marxist is they're going after a new world order. You've probably heard that term before. And what that means is, by world, it means a world government politically, and it means a socialist structure throughout the whole world economically. Totalitarianism, now if you don't know what that means, you've probably heard the term, but if you don't know what that means a total control from government. So someone or a group of people over the top totally controlling a country and their citizens. So totalitarianism is an essential part of the Marxist-Leninist worldview. And according to their theory of history and material, the violent proletariat uprising is inevitable. And in their minds, they will achieve the abolition of all government, and due to their morals, they are willing to achieve this by any means necessary. That doesn't mean then that they're totally lawless. They're quite clever. They know that if they do things that are unlawful, that they'll get imprisoned and other things like that, and that will hinder the work. So they're very clever. They are very clever about how they go about doing it. Lenin was a very brilliant political strategist. Now, Marxist-Leninist political push to establish communism is the direct cause of over 100 million deaths of men, women and children in the world in the 20th century. Now, many Marxists reject Stalin because they believe that Stalin and Trotsky had a conflict with each other after Lenin died, and many people say that Lenin wanted Trotsky to succeed him, but Stalin stole it. And so they don't accept Stalinism as true communism. And, just if you're in a conversation with someone who believes Marxism, just avoid the Stalin thing, because you want to have a conversation with someone that's going to mean something to them. Don't give them a reason to reject what you're saying. So this is what Lenin said. War on our part, meaning the Marxist part or the communist part or the Russian Revolution part, would be legitimate and just. It would be a war for socialism, for the liberation of other nations from the bourgeoisie. So that was Lenin's idea of what he was doing. He thought that what he did in Russia was going to spread to the rest of the world, to be sort of like a signal to all the proletariat to rise up. And they also thought that's what the Second World War or the First World War was going to be. It didn't turn out to be that way. Now, here's a quote from Antonio Gramsci. "Socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. In the new order, socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media by transforming the consciousness of society." Now, you can read that in Gramsci's Prison Notebooks. So you can see how all these different sections of the worldview, there's a little bit of crossover here. The whole idea of why the world is the way it is for a Marxist is because the bourgeoisie exert oppressive and alienating pressures on the proletariat. The Marxists do think the capitalist structure was a good thing for its time, but it's outdated now. When we get to history, we'll do that. Okay, law for a Marxist. Like secular humanists believe, law for a Marxist is positive law or legal positivism, which means law comes from the authority of the state. So the authority of law comes from the authority of the state. It doesn't come from the authority of a god or nature. It comes from the authority of the state. So if law came from the authority of God or nature, it would be natural law. That's what they call it. But because the strength of law comes from the authority of the state, that's called positive law. Let me tell you what Lenin said. In what way do we repudiate ethics and morality? So this was a challenge that Lenin was answering. In what way do we repudiate ethics and morality? In the sense that it was preached by the bourgeoisie who derived ethics from God's commandments. We, of course, say we do not believe in God. So Marxists believe that when the first human beings collected together to form a society and a rudimentary economy started to happen, that was when state and law instantly came into being. That was the birth of the class struggle. And so Friedrich Engels said this. He was describing law as a power wielded by the state to keep order. So this is Friedrich Engels. In order that these classes with conflicting economic interests may not annihilate themselves and society in a useless struggle, a power becomes necessary to stand apparently above society and has the function of keeping down the conflict and maintaining order. And this power, the outgrowth of society, but assuming supremacy over it and becoming more and more divorced from it, is the state. I hope that's clear. So, according to Engels, the need for the state comes in order to control the actions of the way the proletariat combat with the bourgeoisie. So it's kind of like a general for an army being overseeing the entire army. So the state is like a general over the army of the proletariat in their fight against the bourgeoisie. As the Marxists move towards establishing a totalitarian government and enforcing socialism, that's the second last step of their worldview. The last step of their worldview is when that totalitarian government enforces socialism throughout the whole earth, the world, something's going to happen that they don't know, and classes will just fade away, and the need for government will fade away, and there'll be this utopian sort of idea. No one really knows how or when that's going to happen. They just know it hasn't happened yet. The proper role of the state in Marxism is totalitarian. There's no such thing as a non-totalitarian Marxist government. Okay? Imagine it like a zookeeper, preventing the animals from destroying each other while preserving them in cages of separation, making sure they get enough food, making sure they do their thing, making sure they're safe. For a Marxist, government is a step in enforcing socialism. Let's move on to economics. You've probably guessed, Marxists are socialists, that's their economic theory, in that they seek to completely abolish any private ownership. And in their totalitarian enforcement of socialism, it's the state that owns everything and distributes to the people. So the means of production, by that Marxists mean land, machines, factories, intellectual property, computers, whatever it is that produces products, are the lifeblood of society. And most of society's problems come from a flawed means of production. So inequality and products not being created in a non-conflicting way to support the bourgeois or to oppress the workers. So murder, rape, theft are all the consequences of problems with the means of production. Oppression and greed are exclusively the realm of capitalism. Proletariat people can't oppress anybody. They are the oppressed. The workers, the proletariat, who don't own the means of production will eventually reset the economic imbalance. That's the revolution. By seizing control of the means of production, thereby restoring economic justice and righting the wrongs that have been made. For a Marxist, establishing socialism and seizing control of the government is the precursor to communism, like I said before, which is communism is the fading away of government and classes. In Marxist thought, this thing called communism, this period of time called communism, that's when human nature is actually perfected, because the mode of production and the way people live is perfected. Let me give you a couple of examples. Progressive taxation. That's where someone who earns more is taxed more than someone who earns less. That's a Marxist idea. Minimum wage is a Marxist idea. It's setting a standard of wage for the workers to look for a job that they enjoy, right? Unemployment benefits is a Marxist idea. I mean, I'm not saying that other worldviews that like socialism or use socialism, like the secular humanists, they don't have these ideas as well, but these are definitely Marxist ideas, okay? So the dole is like fits in well with Marxism. Diversity and inclusion, the idea that you should have a certain set of places on a board of directors for people of an ethnic background or a female gender. That's a Marxist idea. This is how Marxism has come into the economy. Economy for Marxism is really, really important. It's one of the key core worldviews. So Marx said the accumulation of wealth at one pole, therefore, at the same time accumulates misery, agony, slavery, ignorance, brutality, mental degradation on the other pole. So Marx had an idea that there was a fixed amount of wealth, and that if the bourgeois have more it's because they stole it from the proletariat. You know that socialist lexicon that I read from before? Here's another definition of socialism versus communism. Socialism is from each according to his ability, to each according to his work. That's socialism. I'll explain it in a sec. Communism is a little bit different than socialism. Communism is like this: from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. You see the difference, work and need? You owe the state work, or you owe the world work. And to you, under socialism, comes a fair pay for your work. Right? But when communism comes, you owe the world the work, but what comes to you is only what you need. So if you don't need a laptop, you won't have a laptop. If you don't need 2 pairs of pants, you won't have 2 pairs of pants. Treat socialism carefully. Now, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but treat socialism carefully. You might like a little bit of it, and that's understandable. Be careful with that. We nearly made it. We're up to history, the last one. Okay, so history. Remember right at the top of this video, I was talking about dialectical materialism? Well, history is materialism as well for Marxists. They call it historical materialism. It's a way that human history comes about. Humans are in a state of constant production of material goods, which when left behind are found and interpreted, and from which we understand history. So the way we understand history is we interpret what we find according to the dialectic, the idea of class struggle. In the life of a human, production is first food and clothes. That then evolves into the need of a house and maybe roads in order to service increasingly complex needs as both the family and the population of the community grow. In the constant flux, this conflict language, this flux of communities coming together, there is constant change happening and power inequality as history progresses and things get more and more complicated. This inequality creates classes, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie in our common way of in our Marxist way of thinking. This constant class struggle, remember the dialectic, this constant class struggle, is destined for a synthesis and the emergence of a classless society, like we said when we were talking about politics. After the working class revolution or the proletariat revolution is complete, that's a worldwide revolution of the workers over those that own the means of production, and all vestiges of the oppression of the upper classes has been destroyed. That is the culmination or the end of human history for the Marxists. That's what brings in the heaven of communism. So Marx splits up history into, I think, 4 different sections. So slavery, which is the ancient section, feudalism, which is sort of the Middle Ages, and then capitalism after the Industrial Revolution, or where the means of production changed. And basically that's what he's looking at, where the means of production changed. And so when capitalism came about, it was actually a good thing because it was a progression from feudalism. But now it's an evil thing because we need to progress to socialism, which is the goal of every honest Marxist, is to bring about socialism. So even though I know some Marxists don't consider Joseph Stalin a proper Marxist. I'm going to quote him here because he did study Marx, and the things that he said about the worldview should still be valid for Marxists, even though his behaviour probably make it seem that he's not part of what Marxists would like to call Marxism. So Stalin said, historical materialism is the extension of principles of dialectical materialism in the study of social life. An application of the principles of dialectical materialism to the phenomenon of the life of society, to the study of society and of its history. Did you get that? Here's what Karl Marx said. History is the judge and the proletariat is the executioner. So for a Marxist, history is really important. It's one of their core things. It's to show and prove the Marxist worldview of society and give the proletariat reason for the revolution, why the revolution has to take place. Now, this has been a bit of a marathon. Now, we're finished with history, right? That's the Marxist worldview. But this isn't about giving you a comprehensive idea of the Marxist worldview. This is about giving you some ideas for which you can think, do some research on your own, or have conversations with people. And don't forget, you can watch it again if you didn't quite get it. I'll put some books that will lead you to some information at the end. But like always, thanks for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you for watching the video. I appreciate the time that you spend, and I appreciate the conversation that gets generated from watching these videos, and I hope more can happen. If you want to support what we're doing here and what I'm doing with these videos, I have a separate group called The Looking Glass. Go over and join that group, and you can receive special videos and little blogs and little things that I'm not able to turn into a big production like this. It was good seeing you. I'll see you later.